When he was very old, the Bible says that David was warmed up by the most beautiful young virgin in the whole kingdom of Israel. Her name was Abisag. However, there is something mysterious about the nature of the relationship between David and Abisag. This is because the biblical text informs us that David and Abisag did not have relations, but after David's death, Abisag's name was involved in the plot that resulted in Solomon ordering his half-brother Adonijah, who wished to marry the young woman, to be killed. And this has led scholars to debate what role Abisag actually played as David's companion. Was she a kind of nurse or caregiver to the aging king? Or was she a concubine or secondary wife who somehow didn't have consummated relations with David? What's more, was Abisag the woman who conquered Solomon and was quoted in the book of Song of Solomon, and therefore the heir to David's throne found his half-brother's love for her intolerable? That's exactly what we're going to talk about from now on. So watch this video to the end and you'll understand everything the Bible says about who Abisag was. Abisag was the young Shunammite woman who looked after King David in his old age. Abisag's story is recorded in the first chapters of the first book of Kings in the Old Testament. The meaning of the name Abisag is uncertain, but some scholars suggest that it may mean something like, "My father is a wanderer." Although the Bible doesn't provide much information about who Abisag was, as has been said, the young woman appears in the context of the death of Adonijah, one of King David's sons. Abisag is described in the Bible as a young virgin from the city of Shunem. The city of Shunem was about 26 kilometers southwest of the Sea of Galilee, near Mount Gilboa, in the territory of the tribe of Issachar. Because the letters L and N are apparently interchanged in some ancient materials, some commentators note that the designation Shunammite and Shulamite may be equivalent in the biblical text. And if this is correct, then both terms indicate a woman from Shunem. And for those of you who have read the book, Song of Solomon, you may now be able to imagine where this discussion is going. This is because, based on the possibility that Shunammite and Shulamite are equivalent terms, a few scholars suggest that Abisag may have been the Shulamite woman mentioned poetically in the book, Song of Solomon. However, there is no evidence of this, and most interpreters consider this hypothesis to be absolutely unlikely. So the idea that Solomon fell in love with Abisag and that she was the anonymous and mysterious wife mentioned in the biblical book, Song of Solomon, is nothing more than speculation. So, returning to what is certain, the biblical text also says that Abisag was a very beautiful woman. The Bible tells us that towards the end of King David's life, he found it very difficult to keep warm. His servants wrapped him in many clothes, but he still couldn't keep warm. So the king's servants sent a search throughout the kingdom of Israel for a young maiden to stand before the king. This young woman was to look after David and warm him in her arms. The young virgin chosen was Abisag, and she took care of King David and served him. Abisag was even present when the queen mother, Bathsheba, reminded David of his oath that Solomon would be his successor on the throne of Israel. The Bible goes on to say that after David's death, Adonijah, who was also the king's son, spoke to Bathsheba to ask her to intercede with Solomon so that Abisag could take his wife. The context of Adonijah's request was very turbulent. This was because, shortly before, there had been a great conspiracy to make Adonijah David's successor. But when Solomon was officially anointed king in David's place, Adonijah asked for a pardon in fear of his life, and Solomon let his half-brother live. Later, however, Adonijah decided to make the request for Abisag, and King Solomon evidently interpreted this request as a trick by Adonijah to seize the throne of Israel. At that time, in the ancient Near East, taking as a wife a woman who had belonged to a king's harem implied a claim to the throne. Solomon therefore understood that Adonijah was directly challenging his authority as king of Israel by wanting to possess Abisag. So he immediately ordered Adonijah to be killed, as we read in the first book of Kings, chapter 2. And given this, the inevitable question is, was Abisag David's wife or not? It is true that scholars debate Abisag's real role alongside David. Some argue that Abisag was David's concubine or wife. Others argue that Abisag was only David's companion, in the sense that she was the person with whom Abisag was entrusted to look after the king in his last days, like a caregiver or nurse, without this meaning that she became David's wife. And, in fact, this is a rather complicated discussion due to two factors. Firstly, the Bible points out about Abisag that King David didn't know her. The biblical text says, "But the king did not know her." This expression, "he did not know her," means that David did not possess Abisag. In other words, he did not have relations with her. This information may favor the idea that inferring that Abisag became David's wife is not indisputable. Therefore, the idea that Abisag never belonged to the group of David's wives would not be completely impossible. But, on the other hand, in the second place, the way Abisag was associated with Adonijah's death seems to indicate that, at least in the kingdom of Israel, Abisag was indeed considered David's wife or concubine, even though they had no relations. And why does this conclusion seem so much more coherent? Well, because when Bathsheba told Solomon about Adonijah's request to marry Abisag, Solomon's response to his mother was as follows. Notice that Adonijah's request to marry Abisag was received by Solomon as a direct threat to his place on the throne of Israel. Solomon's reaction can be explained because at that time, as has already been said, when a man married a woman who had been part of a king's harem, this attitude was often interpreted as a claim to the throne. During Absalom's revolt, for example, the Bible says that he lay with David's wives in front of all Israel, in a clear demonstration of power and a claim to the throne of Jerusalem. So this seems to have been Solomon's understanding when he saw Adonijah's request as an internal conspiracy against his reign. In other words, for him to authorize Adonijah's marriage to Abisag implied giving up his kingdom in favor of his opponents. Solomon would hardly have had this kind of reaction if Abisag had simply been his father's nurse or caregiver. So, all things considered, most scholars believe that Abisag enjoyed the status of David's wife or concubine in the kingdom of Israel, although she never had relations with the king. Now, write in the comments if you already knew the story of Abisag in the Bible, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos here. Watch our sponsor's video now.
Or are afraid of ever developing cancer. I know you keep wondering, what will become of me? Will I be alive tomorrow? Will one day, will the pharmaceutical industry be able to create a solution to my problem? One thing I assure you, this industry is not worried at all about you. Think with me, why do you think technology involves, the sciences involved, medicine itself involves? And we still don't have a solution to this old problem, fortunately along with my team. We have gathered more than 100 definitive forms to beat cancer, some of them 10,000 times more effective than the conventional way. Do you want access to this list? Then click on the link and come find out. The link will be fixed in the comment.